Perfect. Thank you very much, everyone. I think we'll get started. Certainly appreciate you making time this morning or this afternoon or evening, wherever you might be in the world. So I certainly want to thank you all for joining us today on this webinar. A quick piece of housekeeping: the webinar is split into two parts. The first will be a conversation with our guests for 35 minutes, followed by a Q&A. So if you have any questions, please do submit them using the Q&A button you should see at the bottom of your screen. And as always, this webinar will be posted online and made available via our podcast provider, Apple and Spotify. So before I kick off, I want to recognize that it's so amazing to see 300 to 400 participants each month joining and engaging in this conversation around alumni management. It really recognizes that this topic is growing in relevance, and there is a fundamental acceptance by almost all organizations that the exit interview is not the end of the employee experience. There are many people that might be listening in that perhaps we don't know. So if you have a topic or if you have something you want to talk about, please, of course, feel free to reach out. In addition, the largest piece of feedback we've been getting month on month was from alumni leaders asking us to share and make public more content, training, and resources that our guests are talking about on the webinars. So some of the talks we've talked about strategy, others around launch plans, and others around an ideation board. And we received a lot of emails asking to see this stuff. So working with a few of these community leaders, we have beta launched our alumniaces.com as a home for everything alumni related, from news to training to ideas. And as part of this, we're also launching the first Alumni ACES conference in Atlanta in November. And we're thrilled that our partners American Airlines and Hilton Hotels have kindly agreed to fly everyone there and house them. So no need to secure budgets. Feel free to head to alumniaces.com and register there. So with that, today I'd like to focus on this rather massive topic of how alumni management is also reputation management. We expect this to be a series of webinars around the conversation of how you leverage your alumni to drive brand value, and how different organizations across a series of different industries and with differing business expectations all recognize that success starts with how the organization's brand is represented, not only to the individual who left, but also its reflection on the culture of the firm and how it's perceived by the market. I'd almost like to start with the end of this webinar, which is that for a program to have success, the first two metrics you have to track are the size of your community and the extent that they like you. Because without people, you cannot ask for anything, and if they don't like you, they won't do anything. So those should really be the two metrics that start your KPI workbook or alumni scorecard. And I hope all of you on the call can either access or have access to a way to get this data on a recurring basis. So with that, I want to start this conversation around alumni and reputation with a brilliant example that I'm sure will resonate with many of you: Wells Fargo. They went through a crisis a number of years ago. And during that time, no matter how awesome the internal culture, or how great the employee experience, or even how removed a particular employee was from the crisis, it was not a proud moment to be an employee. It wasn't a secret that sharing you got a new job at Wells Fargo would not be met with cheers, but an announcement of leaving would be met with likes. Part of their rebuilding the trust with their employees, their former employees, and the market in general has been through honest and open communications, being transparent about what occurred, and one by one rebuilding relationships with their brand. Their alumni network, which recently launched, aims to be a small part of this transformation, engaging with former employees, delivering value, being of service, and starting a relationship. And it's working. So I recognize that that use case for many people on the phone may not resonate, as your organization is not undergoing a crisis. But the root of the story should. For someone to want to be an advocate for your organization, they have to have, and the market has to have, a good reflection of the brand. For someone to want to join your network in the first place, there has to be value. And in all cases, there has to be genuine honesty and empathy for your end users, and as we repeat so often, an alumni-first mentality. Very often in alumni discussions, the conversation comes up around ROR, or the return on relationship, which in summary is an abstract way to measure the value of a nurtured relationship. The use case in alumni is creating a positive and valuable relationship with your alumni will create a positive sentiment, and that fairy dust will go out into the world and hopefully come back in the form of an actual KPI you can measure. Return on relationship is a critical metric measured via engagement, net promoter score, social interactions, or referrals and reach. However, the concept of return on relationship is fundamentally misplaced for alumni leaders, and tracking it or trying to track it using perhaps the NPS score or a social report is really just a vanity data point that ultimately hurts the program. And the reason because the very concept of return on relationship for alumni means you as an organization have already failed at one of the core pillars of a successful program. By tracking return on relationship, you're tracking the value back to you, which means you're putting the organization first and not the alumni. By tracking return on relationship, you're tracking the obvious, perhaps the sheep, the standard, the normal, the 78% of respondents that said they would refer your company to a friend of colleague or a colleague. But what about the 1,000 people that got the email asking them to take the survey but ignored it? So really, we believe if you want to track value and reputation management and the engagement in your program, the metric to track is reciprocal return on investment. Because to track value back to the organization without also tracking value back to the alumni is not a community and is certainly not a relationship. Reciprocal return on relationship aims to calculate the joint and separate gains from a relationship, because both parties do invest something when a program is launched. Both the company has invested time, resources, and money into launching the program, and the alumni is investing time to join the program. It's critical to understand that running a successful alumni program is a dyadic relationship. Even the largest alumni network leaders will tell you that the best interactions and opportunities and values come from the one-to-one relationships that are formed. Given each alumni has a different set of needs and a different set of values, this reciprocal return on relationship should be measured on an individual basis, or for larger organizations at scale, on a persona basis. So with that, I would definitely like to start by introducing the guests to this program. And I'm excited to hear their insights. Our first guest is Paul, the Communications Chair at P&G Alumni. P&G, similar to Microsoft and a few other organizations, is different than many other alumni networks in that it is organized and operated by its members, with a kinda-ish relationship back to P&G. So his participation on this call is because their entire network is driven by value, not to the organization, but to each other. We also have Katy, the global head of alumni at HSBC, with 235,000 employees globally and the 7th largest bank in the world and the largest in Europe. Katy has an incredible requirement to serve, engage, and deliver value to an enormous community and to drive value back to HSBC. What is really important to note about both of these guests is that neither Paul nor Katy are in the HR function. This is not about recruitment first. They are both in marketing and communications. This is about people and brand first. So with that, I'd like to kick this straight off to you, Katy, and I'm keen to understand kind of my opening question to you is, how are you leading kind of this millimeter by millimeter, this change at HSBC, both in culture and the communications around leaving, and how's that being received internally?
Thanks, James, and hi, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. So in contrast to your other guest from P&G, our alumni program at HSBC is relatively young, so we've only been operating for about just shy of 2 years. So alumni as a concept internally isn't quite yet at the maturity level that we need in order to have the sort of bold and big conversation with our employee base that leaving is okay. So we definitely hope to get to that point, maybe over the next couple of years or so, and we envisage that the narrative would be something along the lines of, rather than seeing yourself at HSBC in 10 years, it's also okay to think, I see myself at HSBC in 10 years, and maybe my journey between now and then will take me somewhere else. And that is a very acceptable and recognized career path. So we're not quite there yet, but we absolutely hope to get there in a few years. So in terms of how we talk about it internally, yeah, that's kind of where we are.
I mean, that's amazing, Katy, and it kind of reflects one thing that you've done really well is recognize the maturity of your program and recognize that you have to take it step by step, and it's not a, if you build it, they will come. So I definitely agree, especially with the size of your organization. Paul, I'd like to turn this to you. What's kind of amazing to me about P&G when I started this journey with you is how proud your members are to join, how people leaving P&G are so excited to join the alumni network, the emails that come in asking if they can join now, even though they're leaving in a week, the commitment of all of your members to each other, and this incredible community you guys have spent over a decade curating. So my question is, what is your individual responsibility, and what is the responsibility of the network as a whole to the P&G brand? Does it serve the brand? Does it create value for the brand? And is that part of the program?
Hi, James, and hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting Katie and I. That's a great question, James. You know, how much value do we generate? And you started off this conversation with a question about generating value for alumni. I think the simple answer to the question, James, is yeah, the alumni network does generate value to the broad P&G brand, right? And that relationship and the quantity of value that's created has exponentially expanded over the nearly 20 years that this P&G's alumni network has been created. I mean, I think the interesting thing here is just to put some context around it, because Katie made an interesting point in her comments where she said it's okay to leave, right? And to take that sort of mental attitude that employees won't necessarily stay with an organization for 20, 30, or even 40 years. It's interesting in the respect that sort of 20 years ago, prior to the establishment of the P&G Alumni Network, P&G regarded anybody that did leave P&G as, and I'll use the expression, it's fairly rude, that they were dead to them, right? There was a true expectation that, you know, if somebody joined P&G, they would certainly stay for 20 to 25, 30, or even 35 years. So anybody that left for whatever reason was pretty much out of the organization. That dramatically changed, that viewpoint dramatically changed around 2000, when the company recognized that, you know, people leave for many reasons, right? And indeed, some of them, as Katie alluded to, do in fact come back after 4 or 5 years of experiencing other things. And that those alumni still had significant experience. They potentially moved to other companies, perhaps even related to the consumer goods area. So they moved from being employees to potentially being customers, right? Going into the retail trade or to other manufacturers. So the company recognized that really we needed to embrace former employees, stay connected with them, and actually utilize the vast amount of experience those employees had, which was one of the reasons that they were employed in the first place. So that dramatically changed around 2000. And I think, you know, circumstances have changed considerably. So the alumni not only act as brand ambassadors for P&G, and they're very proud to do so, but they sometimes fulfill very strategic uses. Anybody that's followed P&G's fate over the last sort of 5 to 6 years will be aware that the company faced 2 pretty significant challenges from activist investors, right? And the reality is that current P&G employees and former P&G employees are significant shareholders, right? And as a result, there was significant value from a P&G standpoint to make sure that former of the alumni were well advised and educated on the pros and cons of those activist investor requests and could make up their own mind as to what they wanted to do. And certainly the value equation, as you put it, James, of being reciprocal, many alumni felt that they were only hearing one side of the story, you know, if you like, the external side of the story, and really wanted to hear what the company's position was. And the Alumni Network provided that opportunity to them. So I know that was a very long-winded answer, so I hope that addressed your question.
I think it totally does, and I think it's so interesting to talk about this view that, you know, the "you're dead to us" doesn't exist. Katie, do you have anything to add on to that?
Yeah, just going back to something you said a few minutes ago, James, I just wanted to share that one area that we're struggling with internally is catching our soon-to-be leavers before they go, because certainly as colleagues on the phone in Europe will know, with GDPR, we need to get their permission in order to engage with them externally, and it's very hard to do that once they've already left. So one thing that we've actually done since the beginning of our program is we actively invite existing employees to join the alumni network. In fact, we also target new joiners as they're joining. So I just wanted to share that because I know that that is a bit different to what a lot of companies do and their approach to their alumni program. And so, yeah, that's one thing we use as a sort of belt and braces solution to getting new members signing up.
Yeah, I think you bring up two interesting points. One is, and there's a lot of conversation around who to invite, is this inclusive or exclusive? And I think on the last call, our colleague from KPMG said you can't build a bridge between the company and the alumni if you don't invite the company. And that's why she felt that employees had to be able to join. But also this move perhaps to having people join during onboarding when they start with the organization versus trying to catch them when they are exiting. So I definitely love that. So if I was to move on to this next view that we have around kind of perceived value, you know, we believe kind of the concept of promoting and protecting a brand or reputation management is really about three stages: the ability to listen to your users, the ability to forge a relationship with them, and then deliver them value. And you really need all three to make it go from good to great. But before you can kind of do any of those, you actually have to get people in the door, as you talked about, Katy. You actually have to get people to listen, to engage, and to be willing to sign up. And so one of the big topics that we're always thinking about is, what is it that makes someone looking in, a former employee, feel like they have to join? What is the compelling event that makes them do it now versus, I'm going to do it later? And I read a great story recently that articulated this perceived value that I was just going to read out in first person because it made me chuckle, but it also made me recognize that this applies to alumni. The story goes that 15 years ago, my wife and I were down to making a decision between an Acura and a Lexus SUV. The cars had exactly the same features that we cared about the most and roughly the same price. The tipping point that appealed to the geek in me was a voice-activated GPS on the Lexus. All you had to say was, find me a Chinese restaurant, and boom, Chinese flags would light up across the map. Over 10 years, we took 4 road trips, and I think maybe used the feature once. But voice-activated GPS was Lexus's trigger point that made me have to choose them. It was their compelling event. So I think it's the same with an alumni network. You have 80 to 90% of the network that you know everyone's going to use, the directory, the news, the bits, and the stuff. But a directory is not the compelling event that makes someone think, I have to join and I have to join now. It's about finding kind of that voice-activated GPS for your organization, something that's going to make someone say, oof, I need to join this now. And openly, this is extremely tough the larger the organization. With smaller companies with maybe 700 alumni, many managers will know most of them by name, recognize the faces, have a handle on most of the active participants. You know, for many smaller organizations, we find they know the families, the kids, where they left, what they're doing now, and even connected on Facebook. But for you, Katy, with HSBC, the network is so large, both in size and scope, that the network has to speak for itself, because the whole, hey, join 80,000 of your closest friends doesn't really work at scale. So 2 questions for you, Katy. I think the first is, do you ever wish you only had to manage 1,000 users? And the second is, how do you identify and communicate value where you fundamentally cannot have a one-to-one relationship? You maybe don't speak many of the languages, different time zones, and where almost everything has to be kind of automated and have a system and a process. So I guess my question is, how do you stay human? How do you have empathy? And how do you find your voice-activated GPS when you have to be somewhat robotic in approach?
Yeah. Well, on your first question, James, I guess maybe it's a case of not missing what you've never had. So working in a company the size of HSBC, you know, we're often dealing with and engaging with big audiences, whether it's customers or employees, or in our case, alumni. And we just have to approach things a bit differently and try to get a realistic balance between that personal connection and big audiences. And kind of transitioning into your second question, one of the current initiatives that illustrates what I was just talking about is that right now, in fact, we went live with it yesterday, we're offering the opportunity for just 6 of our alumni to attend an internal HSBC University training course that's offered to our existing employees. But all alumni members around the world are invited to apply, and ultimately will share the story of the successful applicant's experience on the course. So, you know, we're taking something that today at least can only be delivered on a small scale, but amplifying its impact and focusing on the wider story that it represents about our commitment to and positive impact on current and former employees. And of course, in time, if we can make it work on a larger scale, we will look to scale it up. And that's just one example, but it's the strategy that we're really applying across the whole of our alumni program this year. So we're going to do similar things in the volunteering space, for example. So what we have to physically deliver is small enough that we can manage it, but the reach and the impact is global.
Yeah, that's awesome. I like that kind of approach, even for a massive organization, to kind of nail it, then scale it. Start small, get success. I think that's awesome to know what your voice-activated GPS is. So for you, Paul, you know, your community is actually community-led, which means it actually really is a one-to-one relationship, but not between the company and alumni, but between each other. They attend a global conference to see each other as much as to learn to give. Webinars, meetup, events. The P&G network is actually so powerful that daily we see these amazing opportunities crop up. However, how do you manage the feedback and the wants of 45,000 of your closest friends, and how do you enable the platform to be organic in nature, where the community can drive the conversation, but you as a chair and leadership team can kind of set the direction?
Well, I think, you know, in terms of the engagement levels, James, I think, you know, we've always taken you know, this multi-layered approach, right? Because, you know, one set of, if you like, engagement principles is not going to meet the needs of, as you put it, 45,000 plus individuals. Those individuals come into the alumni for different reasons, right? Okay, they're all former P&Gers, but, you know, some of them want, if you like, a passive engagement, which is, you know, when I want something, I know where I'll go for it. Right? I can go to the alumni, I can search the directory, I can post on our platform, I can ask questions, and I can get the answers, hopefully, that I'm looking for. So very passive, right? Others, you know, a great many of the alumni want to be active, right? They want to maintain their connections with friends and colleagues that they had at P&G. They want to ensure that their network stays active. And in that respect, you know, we have lots of levels of more active engagement. You know, as you put it quite rightly, you know, the alumni network is organized on a series of chapters, right, throughout the world. Some of those chapters in the United States are statewide, some of them are citywide, some of them are regions. But there are active chapters which get together, you know, every 4 to 6 weeks. So there is face-to-face interaction there. We have levels of engagement on things like volunteering. We have programs for entrepreneurship, both for former alums that have entered that area of entrepreneurship, or from entrepreneurs who want to tap into the significant experience that alums have to help them guide their businesses. Angel funding is another area of engagement. You know, a lot of P&Gers want to invest, right, in some smart ideas, knowing that there's a lot of alumni who do have incredibly smart ideas which create very successful businesses, and they want to get in on the ground floor. So angel funding is another area of engagement. Of course, we're fast approaching every 2 years. We run a global conference, right? It moves around the world. In 2019, we're in Madrid. So that is, again, an opportunity for alumni around the world to come together, listen to some outstanding speakers who come in for the conference. But moreover, it's an opportunity to face-to-face, say hello to friends, etc. And then we have webinars as well, too, you know, like the one that we're on right now, where we invite guest speakers to talk about specific topics or areas. So it's very multi-layered, James, in terms of the levels of engagement that we that we undertake, because we have to appreciate that, as I said, our alumni want very different things from the relationship with the alumni network, and we need to be able to cater to that. And yeah, it is tough, if you're listening to 45,000 needs, and I can tell you that former P&Gers are no different from active P&Gers. They are not shy on expressing their opinions and their wants and their needs and their demands. And of course, like good P&Gers, they want it yesterday, right? So, we have to listen to that. We have to create a forum where those ideas can be exchanged, where views can be really expressed, whether things can be happening sort of overnight or whether this is a much longer planning process. So we create those forums, and it works generally pretty well. Sometimes we're not able to deliver on the timelines that some alumni want, but at the end of the day, I think they appreciate that this is a fairly large organization and will move as fast as humanly possible.
I think that's a really interesting point, Paul, for two reasons. There's two things I think that's really interesting about your program that I think others might be able to learn, which is what actually happens if you let the inmates run the asylum. And the answer is actually some magic can happen. We saw recently a guy launch his book and leverage the entire P&G alumni network to push it to the top of the charts. And then, as you say, that P&G investment syndicate, like really clever ideas. But I know a lot of companies are very nervous about essentially letting those inmates run the asylum and giving people the opportunity to do. But you've kind of proven and shown to a certain extent that within a controlled environment that can work really well. But I want to ask a follow-up question about that, because you have no company mandated performance metric, that impacts your bonus and your ability to manage your mortgage. You have a board and you have goals, but not in the same way perhaps an employee does. So when you're a network of value between alumni who deliver value to each other, and that relates to soft value to perhaps P&G, how do you actually know if your network is decent, good, or great, aside from kind of flat out asking in a survey or doing a prayer circle?
Well, as I said, James, our alumni are not shy of expressing their opinions, so we know pretty quickly whether they like what we're doing or like what's happening, which is always a good metric, that sort of feedback. But we do have very specific metrics that we hold ourselves accountable to, if you like, as an alumni network management team, from basic principles of, how many members do we have, how many members do the chapters have, what's the level of engagement, what's the level of sentiment, what's the level of participation. We have, and we haven't talked about this yet, but we have an arm of the alumni network, which is an independent organization, which is our foundation, right, which channels money to philanthropic activities around the world that are undertaken by P&G alumni, right? So if you're an alumni, you're engaged in an organization that is doing work, for instance, in Africa or Asia or Latin America, and you would like to apply for a grant from the alumni network, there's a foundation that occurs. So, a lot of our members want to continue to be engaged in that level of activity, because that's one of the things that P&G is pretty famous for. They don't want to give that up when they leave, and the alumni network provides them the opportunity to channel that community work, that volunteering, that philanthropy that they really found attractive at P&G. They can continue that within the alumni network. So we do have metrics, James. We hold ourselves accountable to them, and we report out on them every board meeting to see where we are. So there is some discipline, but again, that wouldn't surprise you, knowing that we all came from, right? Yeah. No, we don't give up that.
I think what you've highlighted.
Yeah, you can take the man out of P&G, but you can't take P&G out of the man. I think that's probably true.
Yeah, I can vouch for that. I think what you've really talked about that's so interesting is how you have to have this very broad suite of relevant and different benefits based on all of your different groups, and you have to almost run them all concurrently based on those different needs. So I'd like to roll that same question to Katy, which is, this: how do you measure success? How do you know day to day whether what you're doing or what HSBC is doing is worth it? Or how do you know if anyone cares, especially when success has these different measurements regionally?
Well, I guess similar to Paul, I'd say this is probably unsurprising. For our alumni, we know that they don't consider our program a daily interaction, and we don't kid ourselves into thinking that they do, and that's okay. So we look to measure success over a longer horizon, and we're now tracking alumni pride and advocacy, how it changes over time and what influences it. We've only just started this, so going back to my first response today, we are still a fairly young alumni program. So yeah, we've only just started measuring this, so I can't tell you an evolutionary story today, but we do have an initial snapshot that tells us how our alumni feel and what they want more of. And it also gives us really great feedback that can help us drive change to some of our internal processes at HSBC. And ultimately for us, success is having a membership that's proud to have worked here, that still feels connected to the company and is willing to recommend or even return to us. Probably, I imagine, very similar to a lot of those on the call today. So those are the metrics that we're now monitoring most closely, even over and above membership numbers.
That's amazing, Katy, and I think that's really kind of so insightful to hear kind of how an organization of your size is tackling and approaching kind of this conversation. Giving this reputation management is really about the soft touch. It's not about the CRM integration or the ability to run a report. It's about pride, advocate. And I think that leads to kind of risk, which is for HSBC, you are controlling the risk of knowledge leaving your organization that you don't have access to, risk of opportunity leaving your organization, or even a conversation occurring, but no one there to advocate for HSBC. And I think you've talked about this. This first step is really about listening to your people and understanding what they value. And when you start to think about pride, it's not just what they value from you and your network, but what do they value in life? You really can't deliver value without knowing what they want, what they need. And you see so many networks kind of launch a survey saying, hey, what do you want? News, events, discounts. But you've taken this different direction saying, what do you want out of your life? How can we help develop your career and your life plan? I think that's really a critical difference with how you've approached this program and some of these things you talk about with the university and so forth. So I think with that, one of the key drivers for your network globally has always been to listen and to understand what your former employees are trying to achieve. You talk about a relationship for life. You talk about continued education, opportunity, involvement in your corporate social responsibility projects. But asking what your alumni value is such a massive question for such a massive organization. What does that kind of even mean? And how do you find that you and your team as ambassadors of that knowledge actually try and do something meaningful with it? If that's a fair question.
Yeah, big question. Our role is to foster alumni engagement, but also as part of that, we have a role to play in driving change internally, like I said a minute ago. And we're in a unique position to give alumni a voice back into the organization. And I think for me, that's key. That is one of the critical components that simply didn't exist before our alumni program came to be. And when we engage with our alumni, we get honest feedback and great insight on areas that can strengthen HSBC's employer brand experience, not just for them as alumni, but for existing and future employees. So that to me is how we do something meaningful with it. It's, yeah, it's great, it's interesting getting that feedback in the survey, it's great reading for our team, but the critical piece is us then turning to our colleagues in the wider organization and educating them on what our alumni are saying and inspiring them to make improvements in those areas that they're responsible for.
It literally sounds like a small company. When you talk about how you manage your program and the empathy behind it, it doesn't sound like a program that's got to manage the weight of, 250,000 people on their shoulders. So that's really amazing to hear. And I think It's almost a similar question for you, Paul, which is you talked about the fact that P&Gers are not afraid to talk and to voice their opinion, doesn't matter what that opinion is. And so you have 45,000 people all talking amongst themselves. How do you kind of see the forest through the trees, and how do you define what's important and your goals and objectives year on year, and which ones have the biggest impact, or perhaps which ones are the smallest items but have the biggest impact? So I guess, how do you prioritize the ideas that are coming in and recognize the value and decide which ones you're going to focus on in any given period of time?
It's not an easy process, James, because, you know, there are many, many ideas that the alumni generate which really do have significant value. And to your point, you know, you can't do them all, right? So how do you prioritize? Well, you know, at first, I think, you know, filter that we use, the alumni organization pretty much adopted the same principles by which P&G operates its businesses. They're known as PVPs, you know, principles, values, and purpose. So as we look at ideas that come in, we're trying to judge them on whether this will fundamentally move the needle and make a difference in the communities that we call home, right? And those communities are very different around the world. So as we look at ideas that we would like to undertake, that is one of the things that clearly we look at, right? Is this going to make a profound difference, a meaningful difference to our alumni and to the communities in which they call home? So we use that as a primary filter. Once we're through that, then there is an assessment about, clearly, you know, we're a voluntary organization, right? Unlike Katy and HSBC, you know, the P&G Alumni Network is wholly independent from the company, right? It is a not-for-profit organization. So while we have this relationship with the mothership, namely P&G, we're not tied to it in terms of management or organizational structure. So as we look at the things that we want to prioritize, we clearly align with what P&G is doing and where they're going, but we want to make sure that we create values for our members and allow them to continue the passion that they have to making a difference. So we put all those ideas together, and obviously some of it is funding, right? Some of the big ideas that we have requires us to perhaps find a partner. And an example of that, we recently launched I would call it a fairly significant pilot with EY, right, in the area of entrepreneurship, right? We had many members who either wanted to engage in some sort of startup activity, right, or alumni who wanted to participate and provide expertise to those individuals who were starting companies. So we realized that's a big idea, right? And we wanted to run it globally because it's not something that's very, you know, focused on a specific geography. And so we realized it's a big idea. Love to do it. We partnered with EY to set up a framework to allow that to happen. And we've run pilots in India, China, the United States, and Europe. And that program, because of its success this year, will be rolled out globally. Right? So that's an example of how you sort of weed through the ideas, think about what we want. And frankly, James, you know, some of our alumni, right, because of the nature of the network, will not wait for permission, right? They won't wait for permission for this to become an enterprise activity. They'll just go do it, right? They will set it up. They will network within the community. They will get like-minded people who have passion for whatever idea that they have, and before you know it, bing, it's happening, right? And one of the benefits of the network was, you know, when those things sort of flower, many people within the network go, that's a great idea. You know, why don't we think of that? Let's share it with the rest of the world. And so suddenly there's one initiative by a small group of people who are like-minded and passionate about it, becomes a big thing, because then it's embraced by other network members and alumni around the world who replicate it, right? So they don't necessarily wait for permission, for a rubber stamp to come down from the network, right, to say this is a good idea. They'll go off and do it.
Yeah, I think, you've hit on two areas where we've seen kind of a big difference between going from good to great and scale, which is the ability to leverage and partner either with other sections of the organization or with other businesses, partners, or different team members. So we often look at other alumni programs and say, who could you leverage in your ecosystem to either co-brand, co-sponsor, or do that? And I think that's a really big deal. And yes, you're absolutely right. Your users just do whatever they want to do, whenever they want to do it, however they want to do it. But it does create momentum and scale, and does make sure stuff happens. And that's what happens when you don't have a responsibility to the organization first, and you have a bit more of that freedom. So I think that's amazing in there. And I think that ties into this conversation about relationships, because I personally am always overwhelmed when I look at the size of your networks and the size of your individual responsibilities to their networks, and always having to think of something new and fresh to deliver to your community is like a never-ending uphill battle. And so, a lot of the organizations definitely recognize this alumni to alumni value becomes really important. One customer, when an alumni was looking for a job, doesn't think first to look inwards, and instead says, well, what's the best opportunity for that person? Whether it's with us, whether it's a partner, a competitor, we want that person to be in the best job possible because we want them to get the best skills possible. So when they come back to us, they are, as skilled as possible. So they believe in the value of this sentiment will drive a greater return than kind of the savings of potentially a boomerang employee. But for you, Katy, if we think about the size of your network, how do you balance being a massive organization with a small alumni team and ensure your message is resonating globally? And to extend that question, how do you, as a team, from a management and just a human and an individual perspective, have a global footprint with your small team?
So this is a very nice question in terms of being in summary question, although I know there might be more questions to come. But it goes back to something we touched on earlier. Our program isn't designed to be a high-touch daily interaction. So at least so far, we've been able to manage the program with a lean team. But more broadly, we benefit, as you said, James, at the very start of the call, as a team, we benefit from being embedded within the bank's global communications function as opposed to HR and global, which is a team of more than 400 colleagues around the world. So when needed, we can draw on them for support and expertise at a local level. However, that said, if I'm honest with you, it can be hard to expect that local support when we know that our colleagues around the world are having to juggle a long list of priorities. So that was something we learned last year, and as such, in response, we've re-centralized our delivery of the program. And as I mentioned before, we are focusing on initiatives that we can design, deliver, and manage from within our central global team, yet at the same time have a broad global reach and impact, like the partnership we have right now with HSBC University. So I guess in summary, for us, alumni is not a volume game. So therefore, the size of our alumni network doesn't matter in terms of being a huge challenge. It's about small-scale initiatives that send high-value, impactful messages.
That's a perfect way to put it. Might steal that phrase. Apologies, Katy, if you hear me saying that back to you at some point in the future. And I think, by the way, I think that's a really fair and a really honest answer, is that, you have a team, you're in comms, you do have 300 to 400 people, and many of them want to be involved, want to help, but the reality is people have other jobs, other responsibilities, so it's difficult to be a priority. I think one of the kind of final questions for you, Paul, before I jump into some questions, because some great ones coming in, is, you've got a global presence. You have this conference that your users pay a significant amount of money to attend, and hundreds of them will turn up to Madrid at the end of this year. You've got other companies on this call that couldn't get alumni to turn up to an event even if they paid them to do it. So I guess one of my last questions for you is, what could other organizations, recognizing that many do have a company or a brand they're responsible to, what could they learn from your approach that could impact their program? Again, recognizing all of the enterprise red tape and politics. What are some things other programs could do to leverage some of the learnings that you've had from running this program for, decade plus?
Well, I think, James, you probably articulated it in the first sort of minute of our webinar, which, you talked about this ROR equation, the return on relationship, and quite rightly identified that it's reciprocal, right? So there has to be value creation on both sides of the equation. Right? So the P&G Alumni Network has grown, organically over the near 20 years it's been in existence. But, let's remember that it wasn't that long ago that it was just 4 or 5 people, right, who wanted to create something to help alums connect with each other. Right? And in those humble beginnings, right, there were literally less than 10 people. Right? And they worked incredibly hard to share ideas, listen to each other, try and anticipate what potential members wanted from an alumni organization. And we've grown that organically. So I think, the first lesson is it takes time. Right? This is not something, there's lots of great experiences, and you guys at EA, are a wonderful platform, if you like, for us all to exchange our ideas on alumni networks. And really that didn't exist 20 years ago. We were sort of on our own in doing it and just looking around to see what other alumni type organizations did. But it does take time to grow. And Katy made mention of that. She and her team are in early days, right? And they're being realistic about what can be achieved. So first of all is be realistic. You can't create something literally overnight and expect it to be, all singing and dancing. It's going to take time, right? The other thing is listen, right? Listen intently, right, to what your members want, whether it's just 10 of them, whether it's 100, or whether, James, to your point, it's 45,000 of them, right? Listen intently to what they want. Maintain strong contacts, I think, with the mothership, right? Because the alumni network can offer significant benefits, and it is reciprocal. Right? Many former P&Gers, if not the vast majority of them, are incredibly proud of their time at P&G. They recognize that they learned a lot from that time, and arguably what they learned helped them propel themselves to even better jobs outside the organization. That's sort of inevitable, right? That happens. So it's maintaining those strong contacts with the mothership and making sure it's reciprocal. I know, and there's no easy solution. There's no silver bullet in all of this. You have to try ideas. You have to listen intently. You have to experiment. You have to pilot. You can't be afraid of doing something. And maybe if it didn't work, then why didn't it work? Right? Learn from those failures. Hopefully don't repeat them, right? And try again, right? And that's the way that the network has been built up. And, we've had plenty of successes, but we've had the equal amounts of things that just didn't work, right? And we've learned from them.
I think that is probably the biggest highlight, is embracing fear, embracing challenge, trying it and giving a shot. And for anyone who's watched Brene Brown's Netflix documentary, kind of that fear is a big step to courage. And it leads really nicely into a question from the audience for Katy, which is around fear, I guess, which is fear prevents me from executing so many of the ideas I have for our program. Not my fear, but fear from my management that it might not work. It might not have the expected results. People might not turn up. People might say something shitty. How do you present your ideas to senior leadership or enable ideas when there is an element of risk?
That's a really great question in terms of, I just love it. For us, what worked well, and again, I feel like I'm sort of repeating myself, apologies. They are less scared when we acknowledge up front, look, we are going to try this on a very small scale. So to use the example I've used throughout our conversation today, you know, we are literally offering 6 places on our university course. That's 6 places with an alumni membership of over 12,000. 6 is a very manageable number. So we really didn't run into any issues, even on the budget side. I mean, 6 is such a small number that it's not going to cost very much. So I think it's just about taking those small steps first. Test what works. You know, similar to what Paul was saying, things won't always go to plan, but if there's baby steps, then the risk with a failure is minimized. So it is a really simple response, but that is what we've tried internally, and it is working. You know, last year, while our program made great progress in the sort of basics, building the membership, we were a bit paralyzed in terms of deploying exciting opportunities like the one I've been talking about, because we were kind of assuming we had to go at it with big numbers. And therefore, lots of bureaucracy, lots of inertia. But if you just scale it right back, it still makes a great story. And yeah, so we're finding that that is what's working, and that is what has gotten us around some of those fears from our stakeholders.
I think that's such an awesome answer, Katy, and I think that's so true. Both Paul and you have now said that, which is start really small, isolate that risk, but also embrace and recognize the risk up front and communicate it and make it clear. And if you start small enough, the risk is well mitigated. And I think that's probably the way also for people to think about it, is at first with HSBC, you're absolutely right. How can we do this big? How can we impact all thousands of our members? But actually, well, how do we make a difference to 6? If we can do it for 6, then we can do it for 60. And if we can do it for 60, we can do it for 600. And so I think that's really an amazing insight. A question for you, Paul, which is, aside from the fact that you're obviously a good human, what's in it for you to be the pillar that drives the P&G Alumni Network? What makes it worth your time to invest in having to deal with the 45,000 users? So I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but essentially what's in it for you, and what keeps you motivated and excited by this network, given the fact that it's a volunteer-based organization?
Well, I think I probably go to bed every night asking myself that question, James.
Me too.
I'm only joking. I think it's on a number of levels. You know, the entire P&G Alumni Network is really, it's volunteers, right? We all volunteer our time. We do have 2 paid positions to be, well, actually 3 paid positions to be completely explicit. We have an executive director for the network itself, because we realize that no single volunteer or team of volunteers could truly sort of manage the day-to-day operation of the network. Now it's so large, so we needed somebody that was devoted to the network. So we have an executive director of the network. We have an executive director of the foundation, right? Because clearly that is engaged in many, many activities around the world from a philanthropic and grant perspective. And most recently, we took the decision that we really did need a digital manager, right? Because most of our communications were on numerous digital platforms. As we know from a practical standpoint, things happen to those that stop them operating. So we needed somebody all over that case, as well as, you know, just creating content. So we have 3 paid positions, but the vast majority of our work is all voluntary work. So why do we do it? I think a number of things. We all share a keen interest and passion in staying connected with one another. Right? Most of us spent not an insignificant time in P&G. We made great friends within the organization. I think we all have huge respect for one another. So this is an opportunity for me personally to stay connected with people that I truly admire and respect and want to stay in contact with. Right? It's an amazing network. It truly is. You know, from my personal perspectives, you know, I spend my time now teaching at a number of U.S. universities and at Oxford in England. And frankly, you know, I scratch my head and sometimes I sit there and think, I've got a question here that maybe has come out of my student or academic work. And I can guarantee that if I ask that question into the network, I will get multiple answers to my problem within the first hour, right? So it's a tremendous reservoir of knowledge. And the last thing is that we do have a passion to trying to make a difference. And the Alumni Network and its foundation provides a channel for us to be able to do that, right? So those are the three things. And, you know, I think fundamentally we just like making a difference.
I love that. I want to thank you, Katy. I want to thank you, Paul, for being honest, insightful, and providing this feedback. I'm excited for our next webinar next month around employee experience, taking alumni programs out of the basement, which I'm sure will resonate with a lot of you. We do see a number of questions coming in around analytics and programs for both you, Paul, and Katy. So I'll forward you those answers. And for people whose questions we didn't answer, I apologize, but we'll follow up in the email with all of those answers. I want to once again thank everyone who joined us on this call, everyone, Katy and Paul, and I wish you all an amazing day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.